Okay, so we all live and breathe in our cities, but have you ever really stopped to think about what's in the air around you? Today, we're going to peel back the curtain on an invisible threat that affects every single one of us every single day. Let's get into it. You've definitely seen it. That kind of brownish, hazy blanket that just hangs over a city skyline. It makes the air feel heavy, almost thick. But what is that really? What are we actually looking at? Well, the answer is a whole lot more complicated than just a little fog or dust. You see, that haze is created by a mix of things. But today, we're going to zero in on two of the main culprits: photochemical smog and something called suspended particulate matter. They're two totally different types of pollution, but as you're about to see, they both pose a really serious risk to our health and to the environment. All right, first up is the one you've probably heard of: smog. But you might not know that there are different kinds of smog. This one has a nickname that points directly to where it first became a huge, well-known problem. Now, here's what's so fascinating about this. This kind of smog isn't just pumped out of a factory or a car's tailpipe. Nope, it's what scientists call a secondary pollutant, which means it's literally cooked up in the air all around us. Think of it like a chemical recipe. You start with nitrogen oxides and these volatile organic compounds, both of which come from things like car exhaust in industrial plants. Then you add the final essential ingredient: sunlight. The sun's energy acts like an oven and kicks off a chemical reaction that creates the smog. So what does this recipe make? Well, it's a pretty nasty chemical cocktail. The main ingredient is ground-level ozone. That's the stuff that makes the visible haze. But the mix also has other irritants, like these things called PANs, which are the reason your eyes might sting on a smoggy day. And it even includes toxic aldehydes that can seriously damage our lungs.
And you can imagine breathing in this cocktail of chemicals. Yeah, it has some pretty direct and serious consequences for our health. It can trigger asthma attacks, make it harder to breathe, and over the long haul, it can even increase the risk of heart disease.
And it's not just us who suffer. This smog is toxic enough to damage crops and forests. It basically chokes the plant life that we all depend on. It's a huge sign of poor air quality and, of course, a contributor to the bigger climate problem. Okay, let's move on to our second culprit: suspended particulate matter, or SPM for short. Now, unlike smog, this isn't a chemical gas. It's made of tiny, physical particles, which in a lot of ways makes it even more insidious. So what is SPM? You can basically think of it as an invisible cloud of tiny, solid, and liquid particles just floating in the air we're breathing. We're talking about stuff like soot, dust, smoke, and even tiny droplets of metal, all just hanging out in the air. And these particles are unbelievably tiny. I mean, we're talking less than 10 micrometers across, smaller than a single grain of flour, smaller than the width of one of your hairs. And that microscopic size is exactly what makes them so dangerous. They're so small they can sneak right past our body's natural defenses and get deep down into our lungs. So where does it all come from? Well, sure, some of these particles come from natural things like forest fires or volcanoes, but a huge chunk comes from sources that should sound pretty familiar by now: cars, power plants, and industry. Yep, the very same activities that give us smog. So what happens when these tiny little physical particles get into our lungs? Well, the health effects are severe. They cause direct irritation and inflammation, which can lead to things like bronchitis, and with long-term exposure, it can even increase the risk of lung cancer. And for the environment, SPM is a major reason for that reduced visibility we see in hazy cities. But it also directly harms plants. These little particles can actually coat the surface of leaves, blocking sunlight and slowing down photosynthesis, the very process plants need to live. So let's recap. We have these two major pollutants. One's a chemical cocktail, the other is a cloud of microscopic particles, and they're just saturating the air. But here's the kicker: the problem doesn't just stay in the atmosphere. Oh no. It has a way of spreading. You know the saying, what goes up must come down. When it rains, these pollutants get washed right out of the sky and deposited directly into our rivers, lakes, and oceans. This contaminates the water, makes it more acidic, and even worse, the toxins start to build up in the food chain, starting with tiny organisms and going all the way up to the fish that might end up on our plates. So after hearing about the problem, the culprits, and all of these wide-ranging consequences for our health, our environment, even our water, you might be wondering, is there any good news here? What can we actually do about all this? Well, the good news is the solutions are actually pretty clear because they go right after the sources. Since cars and industry are the main drivers for both smog and SPM, the path forward is all about reducing their emissions. That means cleaner fuels, better technology, shifting to renewables, and embracing things like public transit and electric vehicles.
So, at the end of the day, understanding these invisible threats is the first, most crucial step. We know what causes them, we can see the harm they do, and we even have the solutions right in front of us. The real question this leaves us with is, what happens next? And that part, that's up to us.